Hello and welcome back to some more Code Vein. The game has been out for a little over a week and I think it's finally time to talk about the bosses. Code Vein selection is a pretty big one with 16 bosses, or if you want to get super technical, 19. There's a lot to choose from on this list. Today I've narrowed down my favorites, the best fights, and why to just 5, which will be taking into account the visuals of the boss, or the area you're fighting in, the music, the mechanics, and the difficulty of every fight too. So let's just get right into this list with number 5, the Successor of the Fro, or Eva. She makes it to number 5 on my list for favorite bosses for reasons other than, say, difficulty or mechanics. Though those are super important and by no means is it a complete pushover of a fight, it's that setting, you know, the music that plays while you're fighting, the visuals that really make me appreciate this fight. As you're progressing through her section of the game, a desolated desert town, you learn that Eva was actually brought up in a location just like this. In fact, when she transformed into a Successor, she manipulated the entire area around her crypt, transforming it to match her history. That concept is really neat lore-wise, but in Code Vein, I was really impressed that we managed to see so many different biomes and styles in the locations that you go through. Given that, you know, the entire game takes place in a walled-off zone in a broken city, it could have easily looked like pretty much the same thing from start to finish this game, but it didn't, using clever lore reasoning like this. Super well done, I really appreciate that. And I don't think it was done better than anywhere than when you're running down that long bridge toward the crypt of the Throat and you can hear Eva singing with the sun beating down on you, and in the background behind it there's that final section of the game, the giant walled off plateau with some sort of all important building sitting on top of it right there just in the background during your fight. It's a lot to take in as you walk in there, and it's a lot to take in while you're actually doing the fight. It's just a great setting. The fight itself making lots of use of all that sand around the area, giving Eva these big fists of sand that she swings around or punches and combos you with, shoots through the floor to track you with. Eva herself is poking through the chest of the Successor too, because she's currently being consumed by it, but it only just happened so you can still see her. Mechanically, yeah, it's not that crazy of a fight, but everything else is wonderful about this fight, so I had to have it on the list. Next up, my number 4 is kind of the opposite of number 5. It's the Bladebearer and Cannoneer duo fight. Now visually, this couldn't be plainer upon first sight. Look at the arena that we're fighting in. It's literally just a rectangle room with nothing really to speak of. Super dull and very lacking in that visual flair from number 5. What stands out in this fight though is the fact that it's definitely one of the hardest fights in the game. You're not fighting one boss here, but 2 at the same time. Obviously inspired by the Ornstein and Smough fight from Dark Souls, you've got one big thick boy dealing big damage, but he's very slow, and then the super agile second boss that's zipping around and is very hard to pin down. The difference here though is that each boss is much more intense and difficult to deal with mechanically compared to say Snorlax or Pikachu. The Bladebearer wielding ice magic is attempting to spike you in different ways with explosions of ice or just those long range spikes jutting out the ground, big charge attacks from across the room, basically leaving you super vulnerable if you ever take your eyes off her at any point. Meanwhile, that fire-based Cannoneer to match that ice is shooting out some sluggish and slow giant explosive fireballs from the floor or via a ranged shot that tracks you or a wide flamethrower attack. You have to always be looking out for what he's going to be sending out next via the sound effects, since you really can't take your eyes off that Bladebearer. Now, with a companion in this fight, you're able to separate the two bosses from one another and make it a lot more manageable. But solo, everything from start to finish is on you. It's going to be brutal to deal with. To continue that comparison to Ornstein and Smough, when one dies, the other does not actually gain in power this time. Suddenly the fight becomes a lot more manageable as soon as you hit that first kill, since, you know, you've halved the mechanics to watch out for, which is way easier. So this fight is kind of much more front-loaded by that comparison, a test of skill compared to endurance. Either way, I loved this challenge, and it was definitely a big difficulty spike towards the end of the game that I appreciated. But now for number 3, it's a little bit of both visuals and mechanics. We're talking about the Skull King. My experience with this fight was definitely a little silly. Thanks to my companion, I mostly crushed it without paying that much attention to those mechanics. I'm almost there again in my companionless playthrough, so I'm looking forward to the comparison here because the damage was very high from this fella. It's obviously the transformed Silver, the White Wolf, taking place in this underground cavern resting above a literal lake of blood in front of a blood throne itself. The setting is clearly intense. It's a giant collection of all that blood those poor slave revenants are gathering throughout the game to power this barrier that keeps the city safe from the monsters outside, and it can't be denied that it's a very cool area for a fight. Silver himself is looking pretty though, with his giant golden swords that the absolute unit is wielding in a dual wield style despite their outrageous size. His fur functions as a blood veil itself, which is a really cool visual. And yeah, he uses the hounds, obviously. He makes tons of use of all that blood magic. It's a high damage fight with explosive mechanics and very punishing of mistakes. Those blood buffed up attacks really reminded me of Lady Maria from the Bloodborne DLC, increasing her range and power of attacks via blood magic. It's just the same, except now it's kind of a big wolf boy with bigger swords. On top of all of that, we're seeing different gifts of a Revenant at work, or other mechanics from previous boss fights like that teleport slam attack, and the fight kind of just feels like an absolute slugfest, and it's just really fun. But I love number 2 on this list for even more silly reasons. My number 2 is probably going to surprise you, so hopefully you understand it, but for me, it's gotta be the Successor of the Breath. Now, I know what you might be thinking, this fight wasn't all that crazy mechanically or even visually, so where's this love for this fight coming from? Well, it's almost entirely from the lore. This is literally, right, a little kid who chose to give up his life at such a young age just to protect and save his sister. And in doing so, he is one of the only successors in control of his transformation, choosing to become a giant frost knight because he's a kid and he's always wanted to be a knight. It's a super childish concept, which definitely stands out in this intense vampire game. But if you take a look at Nicola as a child, he's got this little rocket ship backpack on, and guess what? That came with him in the transformation and makes it as a mechanic in the fight itself. A little backpack, this little rocket ship backpack becomes a functional jetpack on this Ice Knight, allowing him to blast forward at insane speeds or shoot up in the air and smash down with a giant explosive slam. That little hat that he has as a kid, when you save him and purify him, actually makes its way back onto his head again, which looks so silly and adorable, but is a great visual representation to show you that this is just a little kid playing at being a knight. Unlike everyone else, he prevented himself from frenzying for years, all on his own through sheer will as well. He's an absolute badass, and he's like 8 years old or something. Mechanically, he's got some cool moves with that jetpack and the ice magic attacks, but I love that he's just trying to absolutely just smash you with punch attacks about half the time, since, you know, he is just a kid and isn't the world's greatest fighter. Everything kind of screams inexperience from his fight, given his immense power and how, well, kind of lackluster ways that he uses it. Plus, he totally reminds me of Alphonse Elric from Full Metal Alchemist, if you get that reference, which makes me super biased. I'm not sure, am I crazy, or do you see why I love this fight? Finally, for my number 1, I think we'll probably all agree upon this answer. It's gotta be the Virgin Born. I mean, come on, it's the final fight of the entire game, pitting you against this monstrous combination of the Queen's power in one entity. It's a literal, massive, 7-faced monstrosity, almost insectoid in its nature. Visually, super impressive and pretty horrifying, with that blue blood of the Queen pulsing through its glowing veins across the body. And hey, in this moment, finally, your character speaks. Oh, I spoke! I spoke! Oh my god! Set in that same blood lake, that blood throne room, it's a cool area for a final fight, but mechanically, it feels like fighting a Dark Souls dragon in a way. Intimidating to fight because of the sheer size of this absolute unit. Its raw basic swings doing insane damage, having a huge area of attack or explosives like shockwaves on the ground. A giant health pool that you've got to fight through, and all kinds of Queen's Blood based magic at its disposal. It makes for a visually great fight to just look at. And it's got to be the best part, where it launches itself into the air and starts to hover, and you see all the different colours of all the magic types, like a firework display going off, and those classic Queen spikes start flying out at you, which are pretty hard to dodge because there's so many too. You got a giant laser beam attack, you got those big blue explosions, you got literal black holes that drag you into them so you're vulnerable when it's attacking you. It's just a fun fight to play and pretty brutally punishing too, and I thought because of that It was a great final fight, kind of ticking all those boxes for me. But what did you think? Maybe you agree with my list, or maybe I've not even included your favorite fight here. So be sure to let me know in the comments. I'm currently doing my companionless playthrough on Twitch. I'm about halfway through, so I'm really excited to try out this fight and all the rest without any revives and no companion damage to carry me. It's kind of made every fight I've done so far without that companion feel like a totally different experience compared to the first time I did it, and it helped me appreciate those early fights a lot more too. For now though, that's going to be my best boss list. I've been Hollow, you've been you, and I will see you in the next Code Vein video.